Our next guest is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, good to speak with you. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with Harry's new Netflix documentary, Heart of Invictus. He made quite a revelation that he didn't have a support network around him when his mother died and when he returned from Afghanistan. What do you make of these comments? Are they a subtle dig at his family?
So Prince Harry hasn't been shy about the fact that he feels across many points in his life that he's lacked support, particularly in dealing with his mother's death, but also after his tour of Afghanistan. Now, what he was saying in the documentary was in the sense that he was trying to relate to what it's like being a veteran coming back from war and lacking social support. But the thing is, it felt a bit tone deaf, because you could take it one of two ways. You could take it that he didn't have an army of psychiatrists around him to diagnose his condition, whether it be PTSD or any sort of trauma-related mental health issues, or you could take it as his family just weren't there to support him, which again conflicts with a lot of other stuff he said in the media, particularly when it comes to his brother William, who he said actually was a huge support system for him, particularly when his mother died, when both of their mother died actually. So it really, the overarching point here is the fact that it just didn't feel very necessary. The Invictus Games, I've often said this is one of sort of Prince Harry's kind of shining glories in the sense that it's one of the things that most people know him for, and it really kind of showed his work as an active working royal and as an independent member of the royal family. And for him to sort of bring, the spotlight back onto himself, talking about how he didn't feel like he had a support network when he came back from Afghanistan, it's not only tone deaf, but it's also a bit ridiculous, because you have veterans that came back from war that didn't have, a palace staff to go to, or millions of pounds in riches and fame and all of that. I think for him to even mention anything about his personal experience, I didn't think was very necessary. I thought the docuseries kind of spoke for itself, and I wish he stuck to that, as opposed to talking about again losing his mother, which I'm sure is traumatic, but we've heard it many times, and also his tour of Afghanistan, which realistically he wasn't in any real danger. He was third in line to the throne at that time. I highly doubt that he would have been put in any real danger.
Well, that's it. And as you mentioned, I mean, obviously Harry's vision for the Invictus Games is admirable, and you can see in that documentary that he has genuinely changed lives. And this is the Harry I've got to say we once loved. It's reminiscent of his late mother. But Esther, do you think that all this bitterness, this anger towards the family and even the media has once again overshadowed what is actually an important story?
Unfortunately, that does seem to be the case. I mean, many people said that this sort of Invictus Games documentary was supposed to be his PR rebranding and moving away from talking about the royal family and his experience and actually trying to carve out a path of his own. But unfortunately, he's fallen down the same rabbit hole again, talking about the fact that he lacked sort of the kind of support after his mother died and after he came back from Afghanistan. It really, it falls on deaf ears, because it doesn't really highlight the beauty of the Invictus Games. He just somehow brings it back to himself. And that's what's really sad. I find it interesting that he keeps talking about the importance of therapy and getting help and all of that. But he doesn't seem to be a good poster child for any of that, because he doesn't seem healed. He doesn't seem like the kind of person anyone would want to emulate. He doesn't seem like the kind of person that if you're struggling in life or going through a really rough patch, you think, actually, I want the mental fortitude of Prince Harry. He seems still quite broken. Recollections very, very much when he gives his account of the lack of support, and once again talking about his mother's passing when he was 12. It just feels very disingenuous. So I don't really see how he can. He's not a great advertisement for therapy. I should just put it that way.
No, definitely, he's certainly not. In fact, the show actually has failed to make Netflix's top 10. Are people just sick of Harry, do you think?
I think people are just tired of the Sussex's brand. I think the sheen has worn off. And I would go as far as saying I think Netflix is very much going to regret giving this couple the £80 million deal. We have to remember, at the time that they gave this couple the deal, they also gave the Obamas a deal at a similar time. This was when, lockdown had happened. They had a lot of spare cash because their subscriptions had gone through the roof. People were literally locked in their homes with nothing else to do but Netflix and chill. So, the timing of the exit, the timing of the exit of the royal family was quite fantastic in that sense. But since then, they've really kind of failed to capitalize on that momentum. They've just spent all their time talking about their struggles within the royal family. This Invictus Games documentary failing to make Netflix's top 10 kind of just shows that they've lost a lot of steam. People are just no longer interested. And somehow they managed to draw it back to their experiences in the royal family as well. I've often made the point that this is not a particularly interesting couple, the Sussexes. They don't really have very much to offer. They're not astrophysicists or doctors or engineers or anything like that. You know, Meghan is at best a C-list actress, and Harry is someone who has led a fairly interesting life, but he kind of derails that with his constant whinging and complaining and what seems like a lack of gratitude for growing up and living in a very privileged position. And I think, you know, Netflix are starting to realize that now. How can the Duke of Sussex's, docuseries not even make the Netflix's top 10? It just shows that people have turned off and they're no longer interested in what the prince has to say.
Yeah, it's very clear that the brand has become very tired. Look, let's move on, Esther, because Harry's actually off to the UK next week to address the World Child Awards before going to Dusseldorf for the Invictus Games. How nervous would the family be ahead of his return to London, particularly as they prepare to mark 1 year since the Queen's death?
Yeah, so, one of the things that people don't understand about the firm is that they actually often coordinate a lot of their public engagements so that they can have the spotlight on issues that they feel very passionate about. This is why when Prince Harry, at the time that he was dating Meghan Markle, released a statement without the kind of consent or, knowledge of his family while his father was overseas engaged in a trip, it really kind of it stirred members of the royal family in a very negative way. And so one of the concerns is that him being here, him giving that speech at the World Child Awards might move attention away from the 1 year anniversary of the Queen's passing to whatever antics that Prince Harry has going on. Even if he doesn't do anything controversial, even if he just comes in the capacity of a private citizen and just gives his speech and goes off to Dusseldorf for his engagements there will be media attention around him. You know, there are questions of where he's going to stay. For the first time, he's effectively homeless. He'll probably have to ask Buckingham Palace to be able to use one of the royal lodgings for the time that he spends in the UK. And we know that his father and brother are not going to be seeing him. There have been rumours that Prince William hasn't spoken to him since the release of his book Spare, and obviously the king is going to be busy with other engagements, particularly because of the 1 year anniversary of his mother's passing. So the concern is mostly whether he will somehow find a way to draw media attention to himself and take it away from things that really matter, which is something that I think the firm as a whole is concerned of, not just particularly members of the royal family.
Now, this week marks the 26th anniversary of Princess Diana's death, and unheard tapes have since been released. This audio was recorded by Diana in the 90s for her biographer, Andrew Morton. Let's take a listen.
He was so grown up, and here was Diana, a kindergarten teacher. I mean, the whole thing was ridiculous. And my husband won't even talk to Mummy, barely. Because at Harry's christening, Charles went up to Mummy and said, he was so disappointed, we thought it would be a girl. And Mummy snapped his head off and said, you should realise how lucky you are to have a child that's normal. And ever since that day, a shutter's come down, and that's what he does when he gets somebody answering back at him, so to speak.
Some interesting revelations there, Esther. Firstly, that King Charles wanted a girl instead of Prince Harry, but also Diana claiming that the marriage to King Charles was ridiculous. How damaging is this for the king?
Yeah, look, the whole Charles and Diana saga will always kind of be a stain on King Charles's past. We know that marriage was tumultuous. Often, the media tends to kind of whitewash a lot of the tenuous moments in their marriage. So we know that Diana was very unhappy and she had mental health issues, and King Charles had this affair with Camilla, and they weren't a very good pairing. But obviously the only people that know the truth, the absolute truth of what happened in their marriage is King Charles and Princess Diana. The reality is, whenever these kind of rehashings of history come up, it is obviously damaging, but I think not to the extent that it was when the revelations first came out. Of course, we know that King Charles and Princess Diana's marriage was ill-advised. Hindsight is 2020. But we also know that King Charles wanted actually a girl, which actually isn't as scandalous as you might think. You would think that in the whole kind of sort of tradition of aristocracy, he would have favoured two boys, because obviously boys at the time would be in the line of succession. So it was actually potentially quite forward-thinking of him to want a girl and to want to have that kind of balanced family in that way. But obviously his mother-in-law at the time was very unhappy about it. These are the kind of things that we know will always come up whenever we talk about King Charles, and it's kind of baked into the cake. There will always be some sort of drama surrounding the royal family, and particularly individual members of the royal family. At the moment, I don't think it's particularly damaging. The Queen is now Camilla, and the public seems to have made their peace with that. I must highlight that this documentary, following the 26th year anniversary of Princess Diana's death, was actually aired in the US. So this is more tailored towards American audiences who may not have the kind of same affinity for the royal family or the same knowledge of the history of the royal family as we do here.
OK, well, it'll be interesting to see if more tapes are released then. Just finally, of course, Mohammed Al Fayed, that self-made Egyptian billionaire who, of course, bought Harrods department store, has this week died. Of course, his son Dodi died with Princess Diana in the car crash in 1997. Esther, what was Mohammed Al Fayed's relationship like with the royal family?
His relationship with the royal family and sort of British aristocracy and the British government at best was quite tenuous. We have to remember that Mohammed Al Fayed actually added the Al in his name when he moved to the UK. He always kind of mimicked himself as some sort of renegade royal of a house unknown. He lived in the UK for decades and he was refused British citizenship by the government. So that kind of soured relations between him and the government. He actually threatened to move to France, where he owned the Ritz in Paris, because he thought the French were warmer to him. But he grew up in effectively what was British Egypt. He always had an affinity for Britain and for the royal family. But the British aristocracy never warmed to him, even though he was very, very wealthy and a self-made man by all accounts. You know, the sources of his wealth were always tenuous, and he always seemed like the kind of self-serving upstart that really the aristocracy kind of turned their nose down at. After, you know, his son Dodi's death and Princess Diana's death, he often made claims that, well, false claims that Princess Diana was pregnant with his son's child at the time of the death, which was, again, unconfirmed rumours, and that she was killed because the royal family didn't want her to have a Muslim child. All these sorts of allegations that effectively were never proven because, for all intents and purposes, they weren't true. He only dropped these sorts of claims and these conspiracies in 2008, and he quoted that it was to stop prolonging the grief of Princess Diana's sons that he knew loved her very much. But Mohammed Al Fayed was a very, very interesting character. He always clearly made it known that he wanted to have some sort of royal appeal. He didn't belong to any house a royal house that we know of, so the Al in his name was always strange. But yeah, he died having kind of unrealized hopes of some sort of affinity or affiliation with British aristocracy that never materialised.
Yeah, it's fascinating that he really seemed to love the royal family, but perhaps that sort of love wasn't received that well. Esther Krakue, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.